All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. There are a good number of people on the line, and we got a lot to go over, and we don't want to waste your time today. So we can let people join as they're able, but we'll go ahead and kick off. This is Grace Readiness here at 100K and 10. I am the head of strategic initiatives and chief of staff here, and really excited to have been working with several 100K and 10 partners over the past, I guess, 9 months. Around a collaborative project that we've been doing called Success with STEM that is been supporting the inclusion of STEM and the promotion of, and the prioritization of STEM in state ESSA plans. As we've come to the end of this period, or as we're coming to the end of the period of states submitting their plans and starting to think about how we work in the in the era of ESSA implementation, we're excited to bring a couple of experts to you today to speak with us about how ESSA is showing up in state plans so far and continued opportunities to take advantage of those places where it's showing up and places where it might not be showing up quite so clearly. And so we have on board with us today a team from Education First, who is going to go through a report they've just released this week. And we have with us Anand Vaishnav and Jacob Waters from Ed First, and they're going to go through their findings with us first, and then we'll transition over to a team from Achieve, Jenny Taylor, Vanessa Wolbrink, and Michael Locke, who will go through what they have found specifically around science and accountability in state ESSA plans. We're really excited to have the opportunity to hear from these folks and then to ask them questions and to have a bit of discussion towards the end. So thank you so much for joining. Please do. We will share these slides, I believe, at First and Achieve teams. Let me know if I misspoke there, but I believe we can share these slides. We've already shared the reports, and we'll do so again in follow-up. But please do be ready and feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that you have during this during the end of the webinar, during the Q&A time, because it's a great opportunity to get to speak directly with the folks who have spent a lot of time reviewing these plans and learning more about them. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Ed First team.
Great, thank you, Grace, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making some time today to spend some time with us to talk about STEM in ESSA. So as Grace mentioned, my name is Anand. I'm with Education First, and my colleague Jacob and I put together this report that we'll be talking about today. It's a little bit of a twofer. So we've got this report. The title slide says it's about the Making the Most of ESSA report by Ed First, but we've also got our colleagues from Achieve, which put out a great report last week on science in ESSA. So I'm going to go through our findings, and then we'll turn it over to Achieve folks, and then, as Grace mentioned, we'll dive into your questions. So we have a lot to get through, so we'll jump in. Who are we? So Education First is a national education policy consulting firm. We're deeply involved in ESSA planning and development with states and nonprofits. And we created this resource on behalf of Overdeck Family Foundation. And Brian Carter from Overdeck is on the line, and we just want to thank him for his support in this. And was really to answer the question of what are states doing, what are they proposing on STEM and ESSA, and how can advocates and funders and others push those ideas even further, and how should states themselves be thinking about it? So if you're from a state, you might use this document to get some inspiration for your ESSA plans, whether they've been submitted or you're still developing them. If you're in a district, you might think about this to keep an eye on STEM and ESSA for the elements that will be presented to you soon as implementation begins, like 21st century community learning centers. And if you're an advocate, which I think most of the folks on this call are, hopefully this will arm you with information and comparisons with other states to drive your advocacy efforts in the places where you're working. So I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly to save time for discussion. And as Grace said, yes, all of these slides they're out in public, so you can look through them at your leisure. I think everybody on this line can agree that high quality STEM education is vital, not just for our economy, but also for students' well-rounded education. The research does support that. The problem, though, is that inequitable access to STEM jeopardizes both of those things. And what we see is that students of color and in high poverty schools don't have the same kind of access and employment opportunities that their peers might have. So here comes ESSA, and because of its relatively more autonomy to states than its predecessor of No Child Left Behind, states now have more leeway to expand STEM opportunities in a number of different places. And so how do they do that? Well, so we found it's mainly in three funding categories. Title I with school improvement, Title II with teacher training and support, and Title IV with student supports. In a minute, our colleagues at Achieve are going to talk about Title III, which is for English language learners. These are the main areas of the ESSA plans that we focused on in terms of where STEM is most likely to be housed, where STEM proposals are sitting in ESSA plans. And it's hard to talk about this without talking about the funding or acknowledging that. And so the Trump administration's budget actually hits ESSA funding sources pretty hard. And two of the places that are hit hardest are Title II and Title IV, which is where a lot of STEM proposals are located. Conventional wisdom is this probably is not going to pass just in this form, but that remains to be seen. There's a lot going on in Washington these days, so we'll see what comes of this, but it's something certainly to keep an eye on. So what did we do? Well, we reviewed 25 draft and submitted plans, so 17 submitted plans, 8 draft plans. We interviewed STEM experts on the front end and the back end to really think about the plans, what we should be looking for as we went in, and then as we gave them our findings, they helped us come up with some recommendations for states and advocates stemming from the major themes that we saw. So that's the bulk of what we'll be sharing with you. And this is our review timeline, just sort of shows how ESSA planning and implementation is going to be happening. We looked at plans that were submitted from April 3rd, starting April 3rd, and all the way till about mid to late June or so, to include some of the states that submitted a plan and then made some updates. And so this is basically our review period. It ended roughly just a couple of weeks ago. And these are the plans that we read. So it's a pretty good mix of states geographically and size-wise, and we read all the submitted plans. And for the draft plans, this is where we relied on some of our STEM experts to interview and said, listen, if we can't read all the draft plans, but give us some high flyers that you think we should take a look at. And so those are noted there. And what did we find? Well, so this is the good stuff. So we found, in essence, 4 high-impact policies that many states proposed, and that's what was most interesting to us. I think we went into this looking, seeing if we could find sort of like isolated examples of innovation or big things states were proposing, and we found some of that, but a lot of what we found actually trended throughout. So I'm going to go through each of these and spend a little bit of time in each of these. But one caveat I do want to say up front is that an ESSA plan does not at all include all the states' STEM initiatives. So many states have STEM councils and STEM strategic plans and their own state education strategic plans, and many of them have STEM mentions in them. An ESSA plan won't have all of that, but will have some of it, and that's mainly what we look for in the ESSA plans. So on the first one, and Achieve is actually going to go very deep into this issue of science and accountability systems because there are many nuances to it. We focused on whether states were including or strongly considering including performance on state science tests in their accountability systems. And so the way all the slides are set up is there's the map to the left that sort of shows what we looked for and which states had proposed doing it. And to the right, then we thought, well, if you do include it, how can you, if you're a state, promote student success with it? And how can advocates, what are advocates also, what should they be looking for in their work on the ground in states? So for example, using science in accountability systems puts a focus on it, undoubtedly. And that tends to drive the amount of time that schools and districts spend on classroom instruction in science. So that's one really big thing that happens when you put science in accountability systems, and it's something to watch for. Similarly, accountability system data, when it's disaggregated, allows you to look at results and really prompts a discussion in states and districts on what to dig deeper for. How are schools resourced to support science? Is that equitable across district or even across schools? So for each of these slides, you'll see that we came up with a couple of kind of examples of ways that states could promote student success in the particular indicator, and then we went a little deeper. So on this next slide, for example, you'll see that we take these practices and look for evidence of where it might have worked in the past, or at least some supporting research. So on the left side, you can see, for example, that issue of instructional time that I mentioned. This has been clearly documented, that states that include science in accountability systems just naturally spend more time on it. Their schools and districts spend more time on it. I'm not going to go through every single one of these because there are multiple ones on each slide, but I just want to, I'll preview these so you can see this is how all the slides were set up, and we'll have the entire presentation for you after this webinar for you to review in depth. So the second thing we looked at was career and technical education indicators in accountability systems. And our count was that 17 states had included them or were strongly including those indicators in accountability systems. So you can see the states there. And similarly, we found actually a number of promising practices that states could put to use and that advocates could watch for. And so, again, not going to spend a ton of time on each of these, but one of the things that was most interesting to us was this idea of multiple measures for college and career readiness indicators. And specifically when it comes to CTE, it shouldn't just be one thing, completion of an industry, attainment, of an industry credential or completion of a pathway. It should be multiple things that should make up your CTE indicator. And this is complicated, right? I mean, the more more inputs that go into accountability systems, potentially the more complicated they are to translate and to interpret. So that's definitely a trade-off, that this is one area where the research we thought was pretty clear that multiple measures are incredibly important. The third thing we looked at was the inclusion of advanced placement or international baccalaureate indicators in accountability systems. And so we found 19 states that are doing that. One thing I should point out, and this is mentioned on the CTE slide, is that the Department of Education, in feedback that it has given to states, has actually asked for more information and clarity on how states are using AP and IB and also career and technical education indicators in accountability systems. They want to know how it'll be disaggregated and what's going to be measured. Is it access? Is it course taking? That sort of thing. And how will it be able to be measured for every school? So this is something worth watching in terms of how states try to explain this better. One of the promising practices that we thought most about here was this issue of a pipeline. AP IB indicators is often used or is used as a high school accountability indicator. But waiting till high school to think about this is too late. And so we really took a look at some of the research that supported creating pipelines for AP and IB coursework in terms of getting students prepared for those courses by the time they reach high school, but also getting teachers prepared to teach that level of coursework. And then finally, we found that 10 states required or encouraged STEM in 21st century community learning center applications. And this is one of the biggest areas I think that advocates have to influence. That's mainly because, as you can see, many of 21st century community learning centers' success is based on the use of an external partner or a provider. And so a lot of our sort of promising practices focus on that. Engagement of partners, creating hands-on programming, these really make 21st century community learning center programs come to life. And indeed, some of the best programming is provided by external partners. There are rubrics to help this look at quality for that, including the STEMworks rubric from Change the Equation. And just this general sense that hands-on programming in 21st century community learning centers, when you have the time and the space outside of the school day to focus on that, really does make a difference, and the research supports that. One interesting nuance we found here is that unlike the other indicators, whether it was just sort of yes, you're including AP, no, you're not including CTE, 21st century community learning center mentions of STEM were sort of on a little bit of a spectrum. So it ranges from New Mexico at one end, saying that look, it has to be an element of every funded 21st century community learning center grantee. At the other end is North Dakota and Oregon that said, yeah, STEM is important, and it's one of sort of 5 or 6 things that we're looking for in our 21st century application. So we wanted to show this slide and quote the plans itself, because this actually might be helpful to advocates to say, if you're in a state that is on one end and you want to push them to the other end of the spectrum, this gives you some language specifically on how to do that. Now, we mentioned Title II and Title IV earlier. Here, what we found in these 2 areas was a little more random. And what I mean by random is that it wasn't the sort of the clear trends that we saw in other areas of the plan. So Title II, of course, deals with educator skills and development, as well as a number of other things. For STEM, we just pulled out a couple of states as a kind of a sample of how states are planning to spend their money on Title II. It ranged from using Title II money to recruit teachers into to staff or shortage areas, which typically are STEM, and went, also New Jersey, for example, on a professional development plan focusing on digital literacy that is going to help students' understanding of STEM. So it was a little bit of a mix here. And I would say the same thing holds for Title IV. Not a comprehensive list, but Title IV requires the use of those funds for things like technology and a well-rounded education. So some states said, yes, everything that the ESSA statute says, we're going to be spending Title IV money on. But others said, no, we're going to pull out STEM specifically and talk about it. So Michigan has a couple of examples of how they want to do that. This was probably one of the hardest ones to gauge in terms of the state's commitment, because many of these application states will list a dozen, 2 dozen, up to 3 dozen things they want to spend Title IV money on, and STEM is among them. So it really just takes almost like a plan-by-plan look at how deep the STEM commitment is. And so we try to capture that a little bit in this slide. And then there were, a couple of things that stood out to us in a couple of states that we looked at. It's not a complete list, as I mentioned, but one state to keep an eye on is New Mexico, because it is going to actually be creating a STEM readiness indicator that is not just performance on science, but student engagement in STEM. And that seemed really interesting and promising to us. So quick recap, these are the 4 big findings that we saw in the 25 plans that we read. State science in assessment and accountability systems, inclusion of CTE indicators, inclusion of AP/IB indicators, and then STEM elements in 21st century community learning centers. And then we list those bullets below to show our recommendations on how states and advocates can be thinking about all 4 of these things. And then we literally kind of took a step back and thought, okay, well, what's the so what of our findings? And we thought, well, a couple of things to leave with. One is just thinking outside of the classroom. ESSA funding can be used for out-of-school time, partnership, professional development for partners. These are things that are allowed under the law and can be used to further STEM access. We think using STEM indicators and accountability in some of the ways we saw is very important. Even more important is to look at that from an equity perspective. Which students are getting access to STEM courses, materials, and programs? Where is STEM achievement headed? How do you want to use science and accountability systems? These are kinds of the questions that we think are important to ask. The third is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, actually, that states can put in their ESSA plans with relatively little effort. STEM elements in 21st century community learning center applications is a big one. And then finally, there would probably be no STEM were it not for outside organizations and advocates. And so we think that there's a big role for them to play in many of these findings in terms of not only the 21st century community learning center applications, but also helping states build pipelines for AP and IB indicators and accountability systems when it comes to access and that pipeline that we mentioned. So that's the end of our report. Before I turn it over to Vanessa, I'm just going to point out 2 slides that may be of particular interest. So this slide in our appendix is just a state-by-state breakdown of which states had which elements that we found, the 4 main ones, with a little nuance added in there for 21st century community learning centers in terms of what was required versus just sort of encouraged or mentioned. And then here is a list of the states that we read and a link to their plans, because as I mentioned, in some cases, some states submitted plans in April and then submitted an updated draft. And so we tried to capture that as late as the last week of June. So I will stop there, and I am going to stop sharing my screen and hope that this technology handoff to Vanessa works. But thank you for your attention. This presentation, the slides that you just saw, that is the report, and so it's available publicly. We'll be happy to make sure you all have a copy. I'll turn it over to Achieve now.
All right.
Thanks so much, guys. Vanessa, sorry, I'm just going to hop in real fast just to make a quick housekeeping note. Y'all, after Vanessa finishes her presentation, we are going to, like we said, have the chance for a lot of questions and discussion. So if you want to be adding your ideas into the chat bar, please do feel free to use that functionality, but also feel free to just shout out when the time comes. So just a reminder that after Vanessa finishes up the presentation, we'll have the chance for Q&A. The
garage door opener might be in the black car.
Okay. And everybody, just a reminder to mute yourselves, please, when you aren't speaking. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Vanessa Walbrink, and I'm going to be joined by Jenny Taylor and Mike Wack from Achieve as well. Achieve, if you guys don't know, is a nonprofit organization committed to making sure every child graduates from high school, college, and career ready. And we're here to discuss the brief we released last week, leveraging ESSA to promote science and STEM education in states. So the new federal education law gives states the opportunity to re-examine their strategies to create better science education. ESSA allows states to set ambitious academic goals, develop accountability plans, and use federal funding for certain programs and initiatives, but states can also leverage existing policies around assessments and graduation requirements to move science education in the right direction as well. So to be able to best advocate for policies that lead to a better science education, it's important to know the current policy landscape and what the baseline is for existing state policies around them. So with that in mind, Achieve's brief provides a look into what ways states can include science and STEM in their ESSA plans, as well as some examples of what states are proposing. And we include a landscape analysis of all states' current assessment requirements and graduation requirements in science to help set the national policy context for science. And just a couple notes that I'll mention before I get going. We only looked at the ESSA plans from the 16 states plus DC who submitted plans to the department already. We did not include drafts in this analysis. But once the remainder of plans are submitted in September, we plan to update this report to include the remaining states. And also, I know Anand mentioned that the focus of this brief is specifically on science, but the way that states develop ESSA strategies sometimes doesn't allow us to actually separate science from STEM. And so, therefore, when we discuss those ESSA-funded opportunities, our scope does widen to all of STEM rather than just science. So I just wanted to say that because you'll hear me switching back and forth between science and STEM, and that's why. So a few big ideas and notes to mention. This is an opportunity for states to signal the value of science to districts, schools, and their communities through science programs and policies. And as was already mentioned, we want to acknowledge that ESSA plans are just one lens through which we can evaluate how states are prioritizing STEM. There are certainly other programs out there like Governor's STEM initiatives and plenty of other things that are moving states forward in this area. So just wanted to say that up front. And I'll mention some trends that we've seen throughout this process. More than half of states included science assessment in their accountability plans, which is significant. And through ESSA-funded programs that states are proposing, we noticed many states are focusing on increasing student interest and engagement in STEM, equity and access, and helping teachers be better equipped to integrate innovative STEM strategies into their instruction. So, as I mentioned, one opportunity ESSA provides is to craft new goals and accountability plans. And while many states have proposed incorporating science assessment results as a performance indicator in their accountability plans, only 2 so far have set goals for science achievement. That's Michigan and Tennessee. And part of this is because ESSA requires states to set long-term goals in math and ELA, but not in science. But we know that setting goals in science can be an important indicator of a state's commitment to improving science education and give them a chance to leverage existing policies, including assessments and graduation requirements, to help drive forward those set goals. So I just wanted to give these two states some credit. And of the 17 ESSA plans that have been submitted to date, 10 states are including science in their accountability system. This is, I should note, science assessments, not including things like AP or IB tests or CTE that might be part of a larger college and career ready meta indicator. These are just the proficiency assessments. And we know that this has become a topic of discussion recently, how a state adds science to their accountability system. And just to give you guys some context, ESSA requires states to include these 5 indicators in their plans. But the department has indicated that in their feedback to Delaware and Nevada that states cannot include science in the academic achievement indicator, which should only include proficiency on math and ELA assessments. The department specified instead that states who want to include science can do so in the second academic indicator listed here. Most call it academic progress indicator because it allows states to use a student growth measure, and that's how most states are using it right now. But it's also sometimes called the other academic indicator because it allows another valid and reliable academic indicator, which is pretty broad. And so that's where science can fit in. And secondly, science can also fit into the school quality or student success indicator, which has a lot more flexibility, sometimes called the fifth indicator. And this has implications for how much weight or value is given to science in the overall accountability plan, because ESSA indicates that academic indicators, the first 4 listed here, must be given much greater weight than the school quality or student success indicator. So if we go back to the previous slide, you'll see that several states will likely have to make adjustments to their plan based on that feedback. And now I will pass it over to Jenny Taylor to talk about assessment and graduation requirements.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So as we were looking at states' ESSA plans, we were thinking of what's the policy context that states are working in terms of what assessments in science are they already giving, what grades are they administering these assessments, and how does that factor into their thinking about ESSA and leveraging ESSA to promote science in the state or vice versa. So just as a quick overview of the K-12 science assessment landscape in states, it's important to note that science assessments are different in terms of the requirements for administering than they are for English language arts and mathematics. So unlike ELA and math, science assessments do not have to be administered annually in grades 3 through 8. Instead, states must test once per grade band in science in grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 9. And then a science assessment has to be administered in high school as well, which is defined as grades 10 through 12. Therefore, states have more leeway in when they assess in science, especially in the early grades, when compared to English language arts and math assessments. The difference in when states administer assessments creates some challenges in comparing assessment data across states, but also gives states opportunities. And ESSA itself provides states an opportunity in the science assessment space in using Title I Part B funds to update science assessments to include engineering, design, and practices. And as many states have adopted new science standards in the last few years, there's some opportunity for states to review and update their science assessments, which has been an ongoing process in many states. So looking at assessments by grade band in states, just a quick note that we looked at the policy landscape in all 50 states, knowing that all states will be submitting ESSA plans, so we did not limit this analysis to just the 16 states in DC that had submitted ESSA plans. So you'll see in this first table, looking at grades 3 through 5, the most commonly tested grade is grade 5, with 33 states in DC testing grade 5. But there are 6 states that test more than once per grade band when you look across grades 3 through 8, Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Nebraska, South Carolina, and Utah. Moving to the middle schools, grade band, you see that the most commonly tested grade again is grade 8. So testing at the upper end of the grade bands is a common practice across states. And Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Nebraska test each year in grades 3 through 8, while South Carolina and Utah test in grades 4 through 8. Arkansas actually also administers an assessment in grade 9. And then once you get to high school, the landscape changes a little bit, because states now have the opportunity to either administer a comprehensive assessment that's given at the end of a grade, or an end of course assessment where the end of course assessment is tied to the course content. So students will take the assessment whenever they complete that course. So we have a pretty even split across states, with 24 states and DC administering an end of course assessment in science, and the other half of states administering a comprehensive assessment in either grades 10 or 11, or sometimes in both grades. And it's important to note across all 3 of those tables that if you are adding the totals, they will exceed 50 at times because of because of states testing in multiple grades. And then going into a slightly deeper dive into the high school end of course assessments. So with the end of course assessments, they're typically tied to a content area, and the chart that you see on this slide breaks out which content areas states tend to test in. And as you can see, 16 states in DC are only offering 1 assessment in biology, and there are 8 states that offer multiple end of course assessments. Biology is by far the most common end of course assessment for students in high school. Chemistry is the next most common, and then you'll see in the other category that states that have other options are listed there. And moving beyond assessment requirements, we also took a look at graduation requirements in place in states, because as you think about ESSA and opportunities to promote high quality rigorous courses and increase student access to STEM coursework, it's important to know what state policy currently is in terms of how many units of science are required for students to graduate from high school, as well as whether or not any course content is specified by state. So we looked at the most recent data we had available, which was for the graduates of the class of 2017, to do a landscape analysis of how many units were required to earn the default diploma in states, and what the course specificity in the graduation requirements was. It's important to note that many states have multiple diploma options, and we focus this analysis to the regular diploma. So as you can see in the chart below, nearly 2/3 of states require students to complete at least 3 units of science prior to graduation. There are only 4 states in DC that expect students to complete 4 units of science prior to graduation. And then there are 9 states that require 2 units. The 3 that require 0 units, it's important to mention that they are all local control states, so they specify no course or unit requirements. So they're not, those states are not saying necessarily that students do not have to complete any science coursework prior to graduation, but rather that is up to the district to determine the course and unit requirements. 2 of those 3 states also have assessments tied to the science content, so students will be taking science coursework. It's just not defined at the state level. And then moving from units to course specificity, in terms of the course specificity, and by that we mean when you look at a state's graduation requirements, what do they say about how many, in addition to how many units a student must complete, is any content specified, content or concepts? So in terms of course specificity, states range from providing no guidance to specifying some topics or concepts to be covered to specifying courses. The most common content to be named in graduation requirements is biology. So over half of states are expecting that students will complete biology prior to graduation. The next most common course sequence we see is requiring biology and then either chemistry, physics, or physical science. we've provided a couple examples of course specificity below. So you'll see in Texas, Texas is pretty clear that students complete biology, chemistry, and physics, and then they have flexibility in which course they can use to fulfill a fourth requirement. And then Maryland has a little bit less specificity in that one credit has to be biology, but then the other two courses must have laboratory experience and could be in the following areas of earth, life, environmental, or physical science. So specificity does vary by state, which creates different opportunities and challenges as you think about increasing access to science coursework and the rigor of the courses. What a state defines in their graduation requirements provides guidance as to what schools and districts have to offer. So that's an important piece of information to have as you think about impacting the availability of STEM courses, specifically in science. And one additional piece of information about the graduation requirements landscape, the analysis we just talked about only looked at the default options, but there are states that have or in the process of developing either STEM diplomas or endorsements. The difference being that the endorsement is usually, with an endorsement, a student has to complete all the requirements of the regular diploma, and then there are additional course and or assessment expectations in order to earn the endorsement. So as of now, Hawaii, New York, and Texas have STEM diploma or endorsement options. Usually these options require students to complete more math and science credits than the regular diploma. So focusing on science in Hawaii and Texas, students need to complete the 4 units of science. Ohio actually recently approved a STEM diploma that requires 5 units of science. And there are other states that are in the process of developing or implementing STEM diploma or endorsement options, including Colorado.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So now we'll talk a little bit about how states can use ESSA for STEM programs or initiatives. And I won't go over a lot of the STEM funding opportunities that Anand mentioned earlier, but I wanted to talk a bit about how we presented this information in our report. So the statutory language itself calls out opportunities to support STEM education in several places, but we also wanted to present information from the non-regulatory guidance released by the department in April 2017 called Resources for STEM Education. And that resource is intended to help states, districts, and their partners better understand how to use federal funds to support innovative, equity-focused STEM education strategies. So the guidance points to provisions that could be used to support STEM education, even when they don't explicitly call out STEM in the actual language of the law. And it warrants mentioning as well that the funding for fiscal year 2018 is still unclear, as was mentioned before. So the outcome of whatever that ends up being this fall may affect many of the programs that we're about to talk about. So I won't talk through all of these, but I just wanted to show that we list the ESSA provision, its purpose, and then either what the statute itself says about STEM or what the department guidance says about STEM. So you can see just in this example from Title I that Title I Part A, ESSA doesn't explicitly mention STEM, but the guidance gives more concrete examples. In Title I Part B, the statute itself explicitly mentions science, but the guidance doesn't mention it. So that's how we lay it out. And I'll also mention that Title I Part B, this is what Jenny was mentioning earlier, that is a clear nod to the National Research Council's framework for K-12 education, and is a clear nod to those states who are working on transitioning their assessments over for their new science standards. So I will just show Title II. Here are some of those programs. I won't go over all of these Title III, the guidance has a few suggestions there. And lastly, I'm going to throw it over to Mike Locke for any closing thoughts or recommendations he might have to share. Mike?
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, Grace. Hi, everyone else. Not too much to say that doesn't echo what has been said before, or that our friends at Education First mentioned. There seems to be lots of ways, if a state was interested, that they could include some accountability for science, or they certainly should include some goals or strategies around that. That seems like a nice opportunity that many have. There's a whole bunch of tools to help states think about their science assessments, whether there's stuff from Achieve or from the academic community or from the national academies, thinking about how to make assessments both high quality and appropriately aligned to content matters. As Jenny mentioned, there's lots of opportunity in graduation requirements. You saw quite a diverse mix there, and states that were interested could use that as a lever to drive things forward. And of course, just building on the other sorts of things, it's clear that some strategies make more sense than others. Sure, context matters, but we certainly would encourage people to use data and evidence to make their decisions. Thanks.
All right, I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. I thank you so much to both Education First and Achieve teams. It was really great to see those really interesting analyses, and I know that I'm sure many folks are really excited to go and take a deeper dive into all of them, because I know that there's even more in there than what you were able to share during this just during this webinar. So thank you so much. We're going to open it up for questions, but before we do so, I want to give Michael Cedar from STEMX a chance to just chime in, because I know that he's been doing some work with some of the state STEMX coalitions to be reading through and reviewing their particular state plans, and wanted to give him a chance to share just a minute or two about what his state members have been seeing as they've been reviewing their plans, as I think it likely aligns very much with you know, what Education First and Achieve have found, but is an interesting take as they're coming directly from some of the folks who are really working to advance STEM in those particular states. Michael, are you around and able to speak for a couple of minutes?
I am still here.
Great.
So first off, just thanks to everyone for the presentations and overview. It's something, I mean, ESSA and its implementation, these draft plans, is something that our states are really very interested in, and, you know, has obviously high stakes for what goes on in education for the foreseeable future. So we're really thankful to have the information, and we will be very sad not to have the continuing partnership with 100K and 10 and collaborative communications and the rest of the group going forward, and hopefully we can figure out a way to continue to work together on these issues. And always, you know, a shout out to Mike Locke, who's always one of my favorite people to be able to spend some time with, even if it's only over the phone. So, you know, we've been actually asking our STEMX leaders to take a look at their state plans, look at where STEM is in there. We've been providing them some guidance to those state leaders who actually have been either helping to write or revise their state plans about how they can get more STEM science education within their plans. And, you know, what was discussed here, I think, really resonates with what I've been hearing from the individual states, that there really wasn't much in particular that was targeted towards STEM education, and that they were, you know, overall concerned about, you know, how the funding would shake out eventually, but also whether science would be able to be included as something that counts going forward in accountability. So it's great to see about 2/3 of the states or so with that in their plans. And also, I just want to point out too, you know, a few of the other groups that we work with, like the STEM Ed Coalition, the STEM ecosystems, are all holding conversations about this Ed-first analysis. And I think it just really shows the overwhelming interest and also the amount of concern within the education field about how ESSA is going to roll out at the state level. And so, you know, any thoughts that our presenters or other folks have on the phone about what the current plans might actually mean when implementation occurs, and what we should be thinking about in terms of support, guidance, resources that we can be providing folks on the ground to really help ensure that science education, teacher support, STEM education stays on the radar once implementation occurs would be amazingly helpful.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's really great perspective.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and chime in with
Thanks,
questions.
Grace. Michael, this is Anand from Ed-First. So I say this with great love for district practitioners because I used to work in a school district, but school districts, when faced with these opportunities, tend to do the exact same things that they've always done because it's just easier. And so they'll just keep doing the same 21st Century Community Learning Center grants applications or partners, for example, or they will take the same approach that they have taken to after-school partners with STEM or even during the school day. So I would look at a couple of things. I would say that, you know, if your state is including science and accountability, it'll be important to sort of connect that with some of the opportunities in the other title programs to say, you're going to be held accountable for this, and here's how that's going to happen and at what weight, because states have to spell that out. And here are places within ESSA that might be able to help you. So, you know, have you thought about using your 21st century funds in this way to address what the accountability system most likely will point out? Have you thought about, you know, taking a look at Title II? And we know that, you know, if it exists, we know that many places already spend it on professional development or class size reductions. You know, is there a STEM element to that in professional development, for example? Have you thought about inviting partners to any science or STEM-related professional development, which is allowed? Title II funds can pay for that. So it requires kind of digging into the plans, which sounds like, you know, the STEMX network's already doing. But I think another piece of that is just also helping people make connections among the various pieces in ESSA and see how they add up to something. Because my fear is that if that's not pointed out, then states and particular districts will just fall back to doing what they've always done.
Super helpful.
Thanks so much for that, y'all. I do want to open it up. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Michael, that was really great perspective, and I think ended in a really great question and response. So it would be awesome to hear from others who might have questions building on these two presentations. And feel free to just go ahead and throw them out there.
So this is Carol from the Smithsonian. Can folks hear me?
We can.
So I have a question for Education First. So first of all, I just want to say thanks to both Education First and Achieve. This is phenomenal summary of the information from the plans, as well as just better understanding ESSA. In the recap from Education First and the recap slide, it talks about the inclusion of state science assessment and accountability systems. And then there's a bullet that says ensures sufficient instructional time, particularly at the elementary level. Do you have any sense of what that push is? Because I know that we're really struggling for elementary teachers to spend time on science teaching. I'm just going to talk specifically about science. Do you have any sense about what those plans are saying? Is there a target that states are looking at in terms of how much time they want to devote to instructional time in this region of the area of STEM?
Yeah, Carol, this is Anand. Just to respond to your question. So ESSA does not dictate that. It doesn't it doesn't require a certain amount of time be spent on any subject. Actually, that really is something that states and actually school districts figure out. There are, as the chief pointed out, there are certain kind of course requirements, particularly at the secondary level. But the amount of instructional time is generally decided very, very much locally. Our point on that particular slide was to show that when instructional time matters is often at the elementary level. Some of the research that we looked at suggested that spending additional time at the elementary level in science sets up students really well for science later on. It increases their interest. It leads to better gains in achievement. It sort of plants a seed that is longer lasting than at any other point in their education. So our point, we were trying to make a point there to say, inclusion of science in your accountability system will often drive many conversations about achievement. One of the ingredients of achievement is how much time do you spend on a subject, and some of the biggest bang for the buck can come at the elementary level.
Thanks
Unfortunately,
so much.
though, ESSA, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, ESSA is silent about any sort of instructional time requirements.
But if you do have access to resources that you've written that talk about the research that you said that you did on instructional time, especially in science, I would really appreciate where I might be able to find that.
Sure, it's on all the slides have footnotes, and so in that particular, it's not on the recap slide, but if you go back to the earlier slide where it talks about science in general in accountability systems, the study's footnoted and hyperlinked.
Thanks so much.
Sure. And I see, Grace, Amber left a question in the chat about elementary science. So just same thing. All the research that we used in the ed first slides is noted and then hyperlinked in the bottom of the slide. So feel free to use it, all of it.
This is another quick question from the Smithsonian. So this is Carol again. If we needed to share some of this information with districts that we're meeting with, because I'll be meeting with 7 districts next week, would I be able to show some of these slides? Always, of course, citing that this is from this Education First report that just came out and giving them the resource.
Yes, absolutely. Share all of it. anything you want to see. It's hyperlinked off our website, educationfirst.com. If you can do a search for it, but it should be in sort of our library of resources as a PDF. So feel free to take that link and use it far and wide, please.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
And for those, if you're at your computer, Jacob on our team has put the link directly into the chat. Grace, I'm just, I don't want to step on your toes as the host, but I see that Patty has left a question there about an equity data angle policy proposal. And I was hoping that she might be able to explain exactly what she meant.
I don't know, is my audio working?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of language that we could draft and perhaps use. And I wanted to drill down on sort of a point made about equity and using data. I mean, obviously we know that it's often the underserved communities that don't have access to these programs, but are there reports that show who's missing out? And if not, can we shine a light on that through some sort of request for a survey to find out, which schools have access to integrated STEM and in our case, engineering programs for the state of Massachusetts? We have it in our standards and our assessment, but we know that it's not taught in every school.
Yeah.
And we're trying to really, shine a light on that.
Patty, this is Mike at the University of Chicago. So there are a whole bunch of sort of regional studies that do that. I know there's a few years old Massachusetts one. There's a couple California ones that just deal with a few districts. I know at one point the STEM ecosystems group was working to sort of figure out how to do that. What ends up happening is a lot of the STEM service providers realize that they're competing for kids and competing for schools and money, and it's harder to share information when there's that kind of competition. But shoot me a note offline and I can try to track down some of those for you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's something we can make, ask the state to do so that it has, it's not subject to anybody's particular interests.
Hi, that might be something that we can connect about a little bit later. I think it might be a little bit of a longer question than we have the time for. We have about 3 more minutes left, so if it's okay, let's maybe connect about that offline. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. We do have 3 more minutes, so if somebody has one more quick question, I think we can fit one more in. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and let everybody go. So I'll sit quietly for just a few seconds to see if anybody has one more last minute question. Okay, I'm hearing crickets. So thank you so much everybody for joining. We will, I'll send out through email. I hope everybody already received the reports that I sent yesterday, but we'll resend them along with the slides from Achieve later today, and so stay tuned for those. If you have any other questions, always feel free to reach out via email. And those of you who are 100 Can partners and co-investors in Success with STEM, we'll be following up soon as we're going to kind of kick off the final portion of this work together by setting folks up for getting ready for that implementation period as we move into the fall. So be ready for that, and reach out if you have any questions or needs over email, and we hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful Friday and weekend. Thanks so much. And another big thank you to Education First and Achieve. This was really great and a really exciting and special small group opportunity. So thank you again.
Thank you, Grace. Thanks, folks. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much.